right, guys, let's look at the second student task statement. It says a mountaineer is climbing on a cliff. She is 400 feet above the ground. If she climbs up, this would be a positive change. If she climbs down, this is a negative change. It says complete the table. Okay, so let's look at part A, or row A. It says she's at 400 feet and then she's going up 300 feet. Now, what I'm going to do is that I'm going to add the equation to the side of it so you guys can see it. So she started off at 400 and then she climbed up 300, which is indicating of a positive change, which means that she's at 700 feet now. Okay. So that's for part A. Now, part B, it says, what if she's at 400 feet and then she climbs 150 feet down? Now, this is an indication of a negative change. Now, as a friendly reminder, when we add negative numbers, it's the same as subtracting the positive number, the positive inverse of that number. I'm going to say that like that. Okay, so when I see 400 plus negative 150, it's almost like me saying 400 minus negative 150. Okay, so I could say 400 minus 100 is 300. 300 minus 50 will give me 250. Okay, so then for part C, it says that she's at 400 feet and then she climbed down 400 feet. Just like we, kind of like work with in the warm up, that positive change and that negative change, they have the same value. They're the same distance away from zero, just in opposite directions. So just to piggyback into the warm up, whenever it's opposite numbers and you add them together, it will be equivalent to 0, okay? So it's 400 plus negative 400. It's the same as saying 400 minus 400, okay? So now with this one, for part D, this number is missing, okay? This number is missing, all right? Now, if I wanted to figure out, well, what's the difference? I would say, okay, 50 minus 400. Now, I know we didn't get to this just yet, but I'm going to kind of start you guys off. Anytime you see a subtraction and you see that the first number is smaller than the second number that's being subtracted, I want to apply the additive inverse, which means that I'm adding the opposite, okay? So, just like we discussed in one lesson, which I believe this was in lesson 2, okay, we want to say, okay, this is negative 400, which means our answer would be negative, okay? So now I say, okay, what's 400 minus 50? 400 minus 50 is 350. Okay, now if you have an issue with row D, make sure you refer to your manager's Google Meet session for more clarification. Or you could piggyback to Unit 5, Lesson 2 video. But we discussed that, hey, whenever the negative sign is bigger, or the not bigger, but it has the greatest absolute value, the answer will be negative as well. But needless to say, back to the problem. So if that's a negative 350, that keyword we need to use is down, and the number would be 350 down, okay? So then for part B, it says write an addition equation and draw a number line for part B, including the starting elevation, change, and final elevation in your diagram, okay? So with this number line, what I want to do is I could count by 50. So I could say 0, 50, 100, 150, 200, 250, 300, 350, 400, 450, 500. And I can stop right there. Now, on your assessment, guys, not on your assessment, but in your book, you guys may have a better number line than me and plus way more space. So please take advantage of that. All right. So let's get started with doing this number line. All right. Now for part B, she started off at 400. Okay. So we need to draw our arrow going all the way to 400. And then it says she went down 150 feet. So just like I told you guys in the warm-up, we don't want to start back at 100. Okay? Just like I used to tell my students like in past years when adding negative numbers or doing these number lines, I want you to think about it at like a board game. You don't always start every time it's your turn. You always start where you last left off. Okay, so it's the same thing with the number line. We want to start where we last left off, which is 400. Now, since it's a negative 150, which let me write the equation for you guys so you guys can recall it. Since it's a negative 150, I need to go back 150 units. And when I go back 150 units, I should land at 250. Now, I usually tell my students to circle where the last arrow lands at so that you know what your answer is. But, I mean, whatever works for you guys, okay? Okay, guys, let's look at number 2. It says a spelunker is down in a cave next to the cliff. If she climbs down deeper into the cave, this will be a negative change. If she climbs up, whether inside the cave or out the cave and up the cliff, this will be a positive change. Okay, so before we jump into part 8, I want to kind of reference back to this question, like the second question. Basically, what it's trying to tell you is regardless if she's in the cave or not, if she's moving up, it's a positive change, okay? So, in part A, it's asking you to complete the table, all right? So, look at her elevation. She's already starting at negative 200, all right? And then the change for the first one is 150 feet down. Now, just like I said, in lesson 2, in lesson 5, unit 5, lesson 2, we discussed how to add negative numbers with the same sign. Whenever we're adding negative numbers with the same sign, it's just like adding positive numbers. You just want to disregard that negative symbol, add it together. So 200 plus 150 is 350, but wait, both the signs are negative, so therefore it would be a negative 350. Okay, so then for part B, it's negative 200 plus, and they say she climbed up 100. Now, the signs are different, so therefore I need to subtract, which 200 minus 100 is 100. But since negative 200 is further away from 0, it will be a negative 100. So the final elevation will be negative 100. Okay? Now for part C, just like we discussed in our warm-up and like we discussed in number 1, right? Whenever they're the same distance away from 0, they cancel out. So negative 200 plus 200 will equal 0. Okay? So then negative 200 plus 250. Now think about it. In the last problem, when they had the same value or the same distance away from 0, just opposite signs, it was 0. Now it's just 50 more, okay? Which means that the final elevation will be 50 feet. Now I'm going to re-explain that again, okay? Now if they have opposite signs, so therefore we need to subtract 250 minus 200. And since 250 is the furthest away from 0, the answer would be positive. So it would be a positive 50. Now, for the next one, okay, to figure out, okay, what's the difference, just like we did in number 1, right? What we want to do is we want to take this negative 500 and we're going to add, or we're going to subtract, find the difference. Let me do this because I don't want to confuse you guys. We're going to subtract negative 200 because that's what we did in our last problem. But we're going to do the additive inverse. Anytime we see subtraction, we're going to apply the additive inverse, which is I'm adding the opposite, which 500 minus 200 is 300. But since negative 500 will be the furthest away from 0, it would be negative 300. So if you notice in this column, they're not saying, they don't have any negative or positive symbols. They just have words. So that negative will indicate the word down. And it would be 300 feet down. Okay. So then for part B, it says write an addition equation and draw a number line for C and D. Include the starting elevation change and the final elevation of your diagram. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to skip the numbers with counting. All right, so I'm going to start off with negative 200 and I'm going to skip so I can have from the right negative 200, negative 150, negative 100, negative 50, 0, skip positive 50, positive 100, positive 150, positive 200, and we could just stop right here, okay? All right, so for the first one, it said they want us to write an equation for part C, which we've already done that. So I'm going to draw an arrow for it. Okay, so I'm going to draw my arrow. Well, I'm starting off at 0. I'm going to draw my arrow all the way to 200 because that's the first number that comes in the equation. Now, with the second arrow, remember I'm not starting at 0, but I need to go 200 feet back, which I should land at 0. Okay. Okay, so for then the next one, we're going to do the same thing, and I'm going to use the same exact numbers. Okay. So negative 200, negative 150, negative 100, negative 50, 0, positive 50, 100, 150, 200. Okay. So with this one, which we did this equation as well. So I'm going to point to that one. So I'm going to start at 0, go all the way to 200. I need to do better with my line, my arrow. There we go. All right. And then I need to go back 250 degrees. So it's counted by increments of 50. So 50, 100, 150, 200, 250. And we land at 50. Okay. So then it says, what does the expression negative 75 plus 100 tell us about the spelunker? What does the value of the expression tell us? Okay, so her starting elevation, if we have to use the table, her starting, or it tells us, let me restart my sentence. It tells us that the spelunker started at, and since the first number is negative 75, at negative 75 feet. Or you could put 75 feet below. Put that in parentheses. And then climb 100 feet up. Okay? So then it wants us to tell us, like, basically, even though it's saying what's the value of the expression, it's basically asking us what's the final elevation. Okay? So her final elevation would be 25. Okay? So if I had to create a number line, and I will break it into increments of 25. So negative 25, negative 50, negative 75. And I'm going to reflect the same number line on the other side. So she started off at negative 75 feet. And then she climbed up 100 feet. So 25, 50, 75, 100. Okay? So you could put the value of the expression is 25. Okay, guys. So if you had any issues with the second student task statement of this lesson, please refer to your manager's Google Meet session, and I'll see you guys in the student task statement number 3.